Why would a man at the height of his fame sing a song so full of sorrow? How could a plea for national unity feel so deeply personal, so full of private pain? What was Elvis Presley really telling us? And himself, every time the orchestra swelled and he sang the opening words of An American Trilogy. The song was more than a medley. It was a map of his heart, a reflection of his country, and a foreshadowing of his own tragedy. The story behind it is the story of America and the story of Elvis himself, full of conflict, hope, and heartbreaking contradictions. Number 16, why was a song of unity so divisive? And Dan Emmett wrote the song Dixie in New York City. He wrote it in 1859, probably over a single weekend. He wasn't from the South. He was born in Ohio. The song he wrote was not intended as a grand anthem. It was part of a minstrel show, a popular and deeply problematic form of entertainment in the 19th century. The full title was I Wish I Was in Dixie's Land. It was a song of longing performed for northern audiences. The song became a massive hit. Its popularity spread quickly across the country. But its meaning began to change almost immediately. In the South, it was adopted with a fierce passion. It stopped being a minstrel tune and became something else entirely. It became an anthem. When the Confederate States of America was formed, Dixie became its unofficial national anthem. It was played at the inauguration of Jefferson Davis in 1861. It was played on battlefields. It became the sound of the Confederacy, a symbol of a rebellion built on preserving a way of life that enslaved millions. This is the first tragic detail. The very first note of An American Trilogy comes from a song with a fractured, painful soul. For many, Dixie represented home, family, and a sense of Southern identity. It was a folk song they had known since childhood. But for millions of other Americans, especially Black Americans, it was a sound of oppression. It was the music of a cause that fought to keep their ancestors in chains. It was a reminder of a brutal past and a painful present. So when Elvis Presley, a son of Tupelo, Mississippi, began his performance with that slow, mournful flute playing the melody of Dixie, he was treading on broken ground. He wasn't just singing a song, he was touching one of the deepest wounds in American history. The choice was deliberate. He sang it not as a battle cry, but as a lament. It sounds sad, like a memory of something lost. He wasn't celebrating the Confederacy. He was acknowledging a part of his own history and the nation's history. But the tragedy is that a song can't easily shed its past. By including it, Elvis was asking his audience to see it as a piece of a larger American story. He was asking them to hear it not as a political statement, but as a piece of historical music, a folk melody representing one part of the nation's soul. Yet, for many, that was impossible. The song's history was too loud, the pain it represented was too raw. The first part of his plea for unity was a melody that, for a huge part of the population, meant the exact opposite. It was an anthem of division, and that deep, unhealable crack runs right through the heart of the trilogy from its very first sound. The song meant to bring people together began with a sound that had torn them apart. Number 15, could a marching song become a prayer? Julia Ward Howe heard soldiers singing a song in Washington, D.C. in 1861. The tune was gritty and rough. The song was John Brown's Body. It was a marching song for the Union soldiers. John Brown was an abolitionist who had been executed 2 years earlier for his raid on Harper's Ferry. To the Union soldiers, he was a martyr. Their song was a promise that his cause would continue, that they would fight to end slavery. The lyrics were simple and direct. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. A friend suggested to Howe that she should write new, more poetic words for the powerful tune. She woke up early one morning in her hotel room with the words flowing into her mind. She wrote them down in the near darkness, barely able to see the paper. What she wrote was the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It was published in the Atlantic Monthly in February 1862. She was paid $5 for it. The song transformed the simple marching tune. It was no longer just about John Brown. It became a piece of profound religious and patriotic poetry. It framed the Union cause as a holy war, a divine mission. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord, it begins. It speaks of the terrible swift sword and the fateful lightning. This was not just a song about a political conflict. It was a song about God's judgment being enacted on earth. It was the moral and spiritual anthem of the North. Here is the second tragedy. After the mournful, defeated sound of Dixie, Elvis and the orchestra erupt into this thunderous, triumphant anthem. If Dixie was the song of the losing side, the battle hymn was the song of the victors. It was the sound of righteousness, of a moral crusade. The contrast is jarring. It's musical whiplash. The trilogy forces these two warring anthems to exist in the same space, side by side. It takes the song of the Confederacy and the song of the Union and says, these are both part of the same story. For Elvis, the battle hymn was a powerful piece of gospel music. He had grown up singing gospel. The passion and fervor of the song connected with his own spiritual roots. When he sang glory, glory, hallelujah, it was a genuine cry from his soul. He wasn't just performing a patriotic song. He was leading a church service, he was testifying, but the song is not just about praise, it's about war. It's a battle hymn. Its power comes from its certainty, its declaration of a righteous victory over an evil foe. But placing it right after Dixie, the trilogy creates an impossible tension. It acknowledges the Southern lament, then immediately answers it with the Northern song of victory. It doesn't resolve the conflict, it just presents it. The performance is grand and soaring, but the history beneath it is one of bloodshed and conquest. The glory of the battle hymn was won on battlefields where the men who sang Dixie were defeated. The trilogy mashes these two realities together, and the sound is magnificent, but the history it represents is brutal. It's a song of healing that contains the sound of the wound itself. Number 14. What does a slave lullaby tell us about freedom? The song All My Trials has no single author. It has no official date of creation. It grew out of the soil of the American South. It was a song sung by enslaved African Americans. It was a lullaby, a spiritual, and a quiet song of protest all at once. It was passed down through generations, a piece of oral history set to a simple, haunting melody. It was first documented and collected in the late 19th century, but its roots go back much further into the darkest days of slavery. The lyrics are simple and devastating. All my trials, Lord, soon be over. It's a song about endurance. It's about facing unimaginable hardship with the faith that one day it will end. That end could mean freedom in this life, or it could mean the peace of death and release in the next. The song carries the weight of immense suffering. It's a song sung by people who own nothing, not even their own bodies, but who held on to faith as their last possession. One of the most heartbreaking verses, one that Elvis included, says, "Hush, little baby, don't you cry. You know your daddy's bound to die." This is not a typical lullaby. It doesn't promise safety or a happy future. It acknowledges a brutal reality. In a world where families could be torn apart at any moment, where life was cheap and death was a constant presence, this lullaby tells a hard truth. It's a song that prepares a child for loss. It offers comfort not by denying pain, but by accepting it. This is the third tragic detail of the trilogy. After the historical conflict of Dixie and the battle hymn, the medley shifts to something much more personal and profound. It moves from the songs of armies to the song of a single, suffering soul. It's the voice that was often silenced in the grand historical narratives. It is the sound of the people over whom the war was fought. When Elvis sings this part, his voice changes. The bombast of the battle hymn falls away. He becomes tender, gentle. It's the most intimate moment of the performance. He sings it like a prayer. This song connects the grand national tragedy of the Civil War to the reality of human suffering. It reminds the listener what was truly at stake. It wasn't just about flags and anthems. It was about people's lives, their families, their pain. The tragedy here is layered. It's in the song's origin, a beautiful melody born from brutal oppression. It's also in its placement. After the noise of war, this quiet song of sorrow feels like the true heart of the matter. It suggests that after all the fighting, all the glory, and all the defeat, what remains is the human cost. For Elvis, a man whose life was becoming increasingly isolated and troubled, this song of weariness and the hope for release must have resonated deeply. He was singing about a historical trial, but he was also singing about his own. The plea, "Soon be over," felt less like history and more like a personal wish. Number 13, who was the man who dared to mix fire and water? Mickey Newbury was not your typical Nashville songwriter. He was a poet, an innovator, and a bit of an outcast. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, he was pushing the boundaries of country and folk music. He was known for his atmospheric albums, which often linked songs together with sound effects like rain and thunder, creating a cinematic experience. He was a serious artist, not a hitmaker. He had written hits for other people, like "Just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in," but his own work was more introspective and complex. In 1970, he released an album called Frisco Mabel Joy. On that album, he first recorded his arrangement of 3 historical songs. He called it An American Trilogy. His version was not like the one Elvis would make famous. It was starker, more intimate, more mournful. It was less of a showstopper and more of a meditation on American history. Newbury was from Texas. He understood the complicated legacy of the South. His medley was an attempt to grapple with that legacy, to acknowledge the pain and conflict without offering easy answers. The story goes that Newbury was performing at a club when the singer Jean-Luc Ponty heard his trilogy. Ponty told Elvis about it. Elvis listened to Newbury's record and was immediately captivated. He saw the potential for something grand, something epic. He wanted to record it. But Mickey Newbury was hesitant. He was not a fan of the Las Vegas spectacle. He worried that the deep, somber meaning of his arrangement would be lost in a big, flashy production. He respected Elvis as an artist, but he was protective of his work. He eventually gave his blessing, but the two artists approached the song from very different places. The tragedy here is the gap between the creator's intent and the performer's interpretation. Newbury created a quiet, thoughtful piece of historical commentary. He was using these songs to explore the contradictions of the American soul. Elvis took that complex idea and turned it into a monumental performance. He amplified everything. He added a massive orchestra, a choir, and a dramatic karate chop ending. He made it his own. In doing so, he made the song a global phenomenon. But did he lose some of the nuance? Did the spectacle overwhelm the substance? For Newbury, the song was a question. For Elvis, it was an answer. It was a declaration of unity, a powerful statement of hope. Newbury's version sits with the discomfort of the history. Elvis's version tries to soar above it. Both are valid artistic choices, but the transformation itself is a kind of tragedy. A quiet, painful poem became a loud, spectacular sermon, and the thoughtful man who first stitched these warring songs together, Mickey Newbury, remains a footnote in the story for many people who only know the thundering version sung by the king. Number 12, why did a song about a past war speak to a present conflict? Elvis Presley began performing An American Trilogy in 1972. America in 1972 was a nation tearing itself apart. The Vietnam War was raging. The nightly news showed images of a brutal, divisive conflict. Protests filled the streets. The country was split between those who supported the war and those who vehemently opposed it. The generation gap was a chasm. The optimism of the 1960s had curdled into cynicism and anger. The struggles of the civil rights movement also continued. While landmark legislation had been passed, the fight for true equality was far from over. There was social unrest, political tension, and a deep sense of disillusionment across the country. The nation felt fractured, perhaps more so than at any time since the Civil War itself. Into this turmoil steps Elvis Presley. He is no longer the rebellious rock and roller of the 1950s. He is an establishment figure, a Las Vegas headliner. He is a patriot who had served his country in the army. He was friends with President Nixon. He represented a more conservative, traditional view of America to many people. So when he sings a song that literally combines the anthems of the Civil War, he isn't just giving a history lesson. He is making a powerful statement about the present. He is drawing a direct line from the divisions of the 1860s to the divisions of the 1970s. The song was a plea. It was a prayer for healing by forcing Dixie and the battle hymn to coexist. He was symbolically trying to force the warring factions of his own time to find common ground. He was saying, "We have been broken before, and we came back together. We can do it again." The tragic part is the hope itself. It was a beautiful, grand gesture. The performance was designed to be overwhelming, to sweep the audience up in a wave of patriotic and spiritual emotion. It was meant to make them forget their differences, if only for a few minutes. But a song cannot fix a broken country. The problems of 1972 were real and deep. They couldn't be solved by a crescendo and a karate chop. Elvis was offering a simple, powerful message of unity in a time of incredible complexity and division. To some, it was a moving and necessary statement. To others, it felt naive, a simplistic glossing over of very real problems. They saw a rich celebrity in a rhinestone jumpsuit singing about unity, far removed from the jungles of Vietnam or the struggles in America's cities. The song was his sincere attempt to be a healer, but the nation's wounds were too deep. The performance offered a moment of catharsis, but the morning after, the country was still just as divided as it was before. The song's grand hope was a beautiful tragedy. Number 11, how could a Southern boy sing both sides of the war? Elvis Aaron Presley was born in a two-room shotgun shack in Tupelo, Mississippi on January 8, 1935. He was a product of the American South. His identity was forged by its culture, its poverty, its religion, and its music. He grew up dirt poor. He knew the struggle of everyday life. He also grew up in a segregated world, but he was profoundly influenced by black culture. He soaked up the blues on Beale Street in Memphis. He worshipped in churches where gospel music shook the walls. His own musical style was a fusion of the sounds he heard around him: country, blues, gospel. He was a white man who sang with the fervor and rhythm of the black music that moved his soul. This mixed identity is key to understanding why an American Trilogy was so important to him. He was a Southerner. Dixie was a folk song he would have known his entire life. It was part of the cultural air he breathed. To reject it entirely would have felt like rejecting a part of himself, his family, his home. But he was also a man who owed his entire career to the black musical traditions he had absorbed. He was not a political activist, but he was not a bigot. He admired and respected the black artists who had inspired him. So the trilogy was his personal way of reconciling the conflicting parts of his own Southern identity. He could sing Dixie as a lament for a lost, romanticized past, a part of his heritage. Then, he could immediately pivot and sing the battle hymn with the passion of a gospel preacher, embracing the song of liberation. And finally, he could bring it all down to the human level with All My Trials, a song born from the suffering that the Southern system had created. The tragedy is that this personal reconciliation could never be fully understood by the outside world. On stage, he was trying to hold all these complicated pieces of himself and his country together at once. He was saying, I am all of these things. America is all of these things. He was presenting a version of the South that was not just one thing. It was a place of deep contradiction, of pain and beauty, of faith and injustice. But for the public, things were often simpler. You were on one side or the other. For some Southerners, his inclusion of the battle hymn might have felt like a betrayal. For some Northerners, and for many Black Americans, his singing of Dixie, no matter how mournful, was unacceptable. He was trying to bridge a gap that many people felt could not and should not be bridged. He was a living embodiment of the South's cultural contradictions, and he put that contradiction on stage for the world to see. It was an act of incredible artistic bravery, but it was also a performance that was destined to be misunderstood. Number 10 was the grand performance, A Mask for Private Pain. By 1972, the year he introduced an American Trilogy into his act, Elvis Presley was not a well man. The world saw a demigod on stage. He was handsome, powerful, bursting with energy. His voice was magnificent, perhaps better than it had ever been. He was selling out every show, a conquering hero in Las Vegas. But behind the curtain, a different story was unfolding. He was trapped in a grueling schedule of performances, 2 shows a night, for weeks on end. The physical demands were immense. To cope with the schedule and to sleep, he was becoming increasingly dependent on a dangerous cocktail of prescription drugs. His diet was poor. His weight fluctuated dramatically. The vibrant young rebel of the 50s was gone, replaced by a man fighting a daily battle against his own body and the pressures of his fame. The performance of an American Trilogy is one of the most physically and vocally demanding parts of his show. It requires incredible breath control. It moves from a quiet, gentle opening to a powerful, sustained crescendo. The ending is an explosion of sound and energy. For a man in peak physical condition, it would be a challenge. For Elvis in the 1970s, it was an act of sheer will. This is the hidden tragedy of the performance. We watch the spectacle and see power. But what we are actually witnessing is a man pushing his failing body to its absolute limit. The sweat pouring down his face wasn't just for show. The dramatic gestures, the deep breaths, the clenched fists, these were the outward signs of an immense physical effort. He was pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into that song. The song itself is about enduring trials. And there on stage, in front of thousands of people, Elvis was living out that theme in real time. He was enduring his own private trials, masking his pain and exhaustion with a display of superhuman power. The performance was a triumph, but it was a triumph that cost him dearly. Each thunderous glory, hallelujah, was a victory over his own physical decline. Each show-stopping finale brought him closer to his own end. The song was a monument to his strength, but it was also a chronicle of his slow, public self-destruction. The power on stage was real, but it was fueled by a deep and growing weakness off stage. Number 9, did the jumpsuit weigh more than just rhinestones? The white jumpsuit is one of the most enduring images of Elvis Presley. Designed by Bill Ballou, these elaborate costumes became his signature look in the 1970s. They were incredible creations adorned with rhinestone studs and elaborate embroidery. They had names like the Peacock, the Sundial, and the American Eagle. When Elvis walked on stage in one of these outfits with the lights hitting the jewels, he looked larger than life. He looked like a superhero, a king from a fantasy world. The jumpsuit served a purpose. It transformed Elvis Presley, the man, into Elvis, the icon. It was a suit of armor. It helped create the myth. The capes, the wide belts, the high collars, they all added to the dramatic, almost religious spectacle of his live shows. When he performed an American Trilogy, the white jumpsuit made him look like a high priest presiding over a national ceremony. The image and the song worked together to create a feeling of epic importance, but there is a tragedy in that costume. While it elevated him, it also trapped him. The jumpsuit became a uniform. It locked him into the persona of the Las Vegas entertainer. The raw, dangerous energy of the 1950s was now contained within a carefully constructed, glittering package. He could no longer just be a singer in a simple shirt. He had to be the man in the jumpsuit. As the years went on and his body changed, the jumpsuits became harder to wear. They had to be let out. They became tighter, more restrictive. Instead of making him look like a superhero, they sometimes accentuated his weight gain and his declining health. The costume that was meant to project an image of superhuman vitality began to betray the frail human being inside it. The jumpsuit for the Aloha from Hawaii concert in 1973, where he gave the most famous performance of the trilogy, was the American Eagle suit. It was a patriotic statement, perfectly matched to the song, but that suit and all the others also represented his gilded cage. He was trapped in Las Vegas, trapped in a relentless schedule, and trapped inside an image that was becoming impossible to maintain. He was the king of rock and roll, but he was also an employee who had to put on his uniform and go to work night after night, whether he felt like it or not. The brilliant, shining jumpsuit was a symbol of his incredible success, but it was also a symbol of his loss of freedom. Number 8, why did A Plea for Peace become a Vegas spectacle? Las Vegas in the 1970s was the entertainment capital of the world. but it was a specific kind of entertainment. It was about glitz, glamour, and spectacle. It was about high rollers and showroom extravaganzas. It was about creating a fantasy world where the outside reality didn't matter. It was not typically a place for deep historical reflection or somber social commentary. When Elvis brought an American Trilogy to the stage of the International Hotel, he was inserting a piece of profound, complex art into a commercial entertainment machine. The song was part of a show. It came after some rock and roll numbers, and before he started handing out scarves to screaming fans. It was a moment of seriousness in an evening designed for escapism. The performance itself was spectacular. He had a full orchestra and a gospel choir, the Stamps Quartet, backing him up. The arrangement was designed for maximum dramatic impact. It was a showstopper. It reliably brought the house down every single night. The audience loved it. They responded to the power, the passion, and the patriotic fervor. But here lies a subtle tragedy. By becoming a reliable part of a Las Vegas show, did the song lose some of its meaning? It became an expected moment in the concert, like a magician's best trick. It was a piece of incredible theater, but it was repeated night after night, twice a night, for weeks on end. The spontaneous passion of the first performances inevitably had to become a practiced professional routine. Elvis always gave it his all. He believed in the song. But the context of Las Vegas changes things. A prayer, when repeated on a schedule for a paying audience, can start to sound like a script. A heartfelt plea for national unity when surrounded by the clatter of slot machines and the glitz of the Strip risks becoming just another part of the spectacle. The song was bigger than Vegas. Its themes were timeless and profound, but its home for most of its life was a Las Vegas showroom. It was an anthem of American history, performed in a place dedicated to forgetting yesterday and tomorrow, a place that only cares about tonight. The raw, painful history contained within the three melodies of the trilogy was polished, packaged, and presented as a flawless piece of high-class entertainment. The transformation was a commercial triumph but an artistic compromise. A song of deep national sorrow became a 5-star review. Number 7 was broadcasting to a billion people the loneliest act of all. On January 14th, 1973, Elvis Presley performed the Aloha from Hawaii concert. It was a landmark event. It was the first time a solo entertainer's concert was broadcast live around the world via satellite. It was seen in over 40 countries by an estimated audience of over 1 billion people. It was the absolute peak of his global fame, a technical and artistic achievement on a scale that was previously unimaginable. At the heart of that concert was his performance of an American Trilogy. He was dressed in the white American Eagle jumpsuit, a walking symbol of his country. He was singing his song of American identity, not just to an arena in Honolulu, but to the entire world. The performance was flawless. His voice was powerful and clear. He was in complete command of the stage and the music. It was a moment of ultimate triumph, but there is a profound and heartbreaking tragedy at the center of this triumph. Imagine being that man on that stage. You are connected through technology to a billion people. More human beings are watching you at that single moment than have watched any other performer in history. And yet, you are completely and utterly alone. Fame on that level is isolating in a way that is hard to comprehend. And Elvis was surrounded by his entourage, but he had few, if any, true peers. He lived in a bubble, protected and managed, but also cut off from normal life. On that stage in Hawaii, he was the object of the world's attention. A billion pairs of eyes were on him. But who could he really talk to? Who truly understood the pressure, the fear, the exhaustion that came with being Elvis? The Aloha special was a massive success, but it also marked a turning point. It was the last great peak of his career. After that, his health declined more rapidly. The performances became more erratic. The fire began to dim. That moment of global connection was also a moment of ultimate isolation. He gave his all to a billion anonymous faces on a screen, and when the lights went down, he was left alone with himself. He sang a song about unity, about bringing a divided nation together, and he sang it in a concert meant to bring the world together through music. But the man at the center of it all was, in many ways, a man apart. The broadcast connected him to the world, but it also emphasized the immense distance between his life and everyone else's. It was the biggest show on earth, performed by one of its loneliest men. Number 6, did his manager hear the music, or just the cash register? Colonel Tom Parker was the man who managed Elvis Presley's entire career. He was a brilliant promoter, a shrewd negotiator, and a relentless businessman. He took a raw talent from Mississippi and helped turn him into the biggest star in the world. Without the Colonel, there might never have been an Elvis as we know him. But the Colonel's focus was always on the business. He was a master of marketing, of selling the product. His artistry, personal expression, and musical growth were secondary to what would sell tickets, records, and merchandise. His relationship with Elvis was complex. He was a mentor and a father figure in some ways, but he was also a controller who took an enormous percentage of Elvis's earnings, sometimes as much as 50%. When Elvis decided to perform an American Trilogy, it's unlikely the Colonel saw it in terms of its deep historical meaning or its personal significance to Elvis. He would have seen it as a fantastic showpiece. It was dramatic, patriotic, and it got a huge reaction from the crowd every time. It was good for business. It was a valuable asset in the Elvis Presley show. The Aloha from Hawaii concert is a perfect example of the Colonel's priorities. It was a brilliant promotional idea. But the deal he made for it was, in the long run, terrible for Elvis. In exchange for the financing of the television special, the Colonel sold Elvis's entire back catalog of recordings. Up to that point, all the Sun sessions, all the 50s hits, all the movie soundtracks to the record label RCA for a lump sum. It was a short-term cash grab that sacrificed long-term royalties. Elvis would never earn another penny from the sales of his most famous songs recorded before 1973. This is the business tragedy behind the artistic triumph. While Elvis was on stage pouring his heart into a song about the soul of America, his manager was in the background making deals that treated his life's work as a simple commodity to be bought and sold. The Colonel saw the Aloha special not as a timeless artistic statement, but as a transaction. He sold the past to pay for the present. Did Elvis know the full details of the deal? It's unclear. He trusted the Colonel to handle the business. But this dynamic runs through the story of the trilogy. Elvis used the song to say something profound. The Colonel used it as a tool to generate revenue. The song itself, a meditation on conflict and values, was caught in the middle of a different kind of conflict, the eternal battle between art and commerce. And in Elvis's life, commerce almost always won. Number 5, how did a song of togetherness mark a life falling apart? Elvis began singing an American Trilogy regularly in February 1972. Just a few weeks earlier, on December 30th, 1971, his wife Priscilla had told him she was leaving him. They had been married since 1967. They had a daughter, Lisa Marie. To the outside world, they were a fairy tale couple, but the reality was much more complicated. Elvis's lifestyle, his isolation, and his infidelities had taken their toll. The marriage was broken. Their official separation happened in February 1972. The same month, the trilogy became a staple of his show. They would officially divorce in 1973. So, at the very moment Elvis was standing on stage singing this powerful anthem about bringing a divided nation together, his own personal union, his family, was falling apart. This is perhaps the most personal and poignant tragedy connected to the song. Every night he would build to this grand emotional crescendo about unity and reconciliation. He was the preacher of togetherness, and every night after the show, he would return to an empty hotel suite, a man whose own home had been broken. The performance must have been a form of escape for him. On stage, he could be the hero, the healer, the man who could symbolically mend the nation's deepest wounds. He could create a world where conflict was resolved through a powerful song. But in his real life, there was no simple musical solution. There was just the quiet, painful reality of a failed marriage and a family divided. Listen to the performances from that era with this knowledge. Hear the passion in his voice as he sings, "Glory, glory, hallelujah." Is he singing just for the audience, or is he also singing for himself? Is it a desperate cry for some kind of grace, some kind of healing in his own life? The song offered a vision of harmony that was the exact opposite of his personal reality. He was a master at hiding his private pain from the audience. He presented an image of strength and control. But knowing what was happening in his life at the time adds a layer of profound sadness to the song. It becomes the anthem of a man trying to hold his world together, even as he knew it was crumbling around him. The greatest plea for unity he ever sang was performed during the loneliest and most fractured period of his life. Number 4, could the audience ever understand what he was trying to say? The reaction to an American Trilogy in a live concert was always overwhelming. It was a guaranteed standing ovation. People were moved by the power of the music, the scale of the performance, and the passion in Elvis's voice. They responded to the patriotism, the spirituality, and the sheer spectacle of it all. It was a shared emotional experience, a moment of unity in the concert hall. But how many people in that audience truly understood the depth of what they were hearing? How many knew the problematic history of Dixie? How many understood that the battle hymn was the anthem of the army that had defeated the people who sang Dixie? How many recognized the final section as a spiritual born from the experience of slavery? The tragedy of the performance is that its very success may have obscured its deeper meaning. Elvis and the orchestra presented the medley as a single, seamless piece of music. The transitions are smooth. The overall effect is one of harmony. The performance is designed to resolve the conflict, to blend the disparate parts into a glorious whole. It is so effective that it's easy to miss the tension that is supposed to be at its heart. The audience wasn't there for a history lesson. They were there to see Elvis. They reacted to what he gave them, a powerful, emotional, uplifting performance. They felt the glory, but did they feel the pain? They heard the sound of unity, but did they recognize the echoes of division? And Elvis himself rarely explained the song. He just sang it. He let the music speak for itself. He was an intuitive performer, not an intellectual one. He felt the meaning of the song deeply, but he may not have been able to articulate it in words. He put all the history, all the conflict, and all his own personal feelings into the performance itself. So there was always a gap between what the song contained and what the audience likely received. They received a masterpiece of patriotic and spiritual performance art. They did not necessarily receive the complex, painful, and unresolved meditation on American history that Mickey Newbury had first conceived, or the personal cry from the soul that Elvis was performing. The song was a massive success, but its deepest, most tragic layers may have been destined to remain unheard by the very people who gave it a standing ovation every night. Number 3, why did the final glory, Hallelujah, sound so tired? In the years following the Aloha from Hawaii special, Elvis Presley's decline accelerated. He continued to tour relentlessly. He performed an American Trilogy hundreds of times. It remained a centerpiece of his show until his final concerts in 1977. His voice remarkably remained a powerful instrument for much of this time. Even when he was visibly unwell, slurring his words between songs, he could often summon the strength to deliver a powerhouse vocal on his big numbers. But if you listen to the performances from 1976 and 1977, something has changed. The technical power is often still there. He can still hit the big notes. But there is a deep weariness in his voice. The fire is banked. The triumphant shout of "Glory, glory, hallelujah" can sound strained, forced. It sounds less like a cry of ecstatic praise and more like the last effort of an exhausted man. The song is about enduring trials until they are soon be over. For the later Elvis, that phrase must have taken on a much darker, more immediate meaning. He was living a life of immense physical and emotional pain. He was sick, overweight, and addicted to prescription medication. The joy of performing was often replaced by the grueling duty of it. He was a prisoner of his own legend. The tragedy of these final performances is watching a man go through the motions of a masterpiece he had created. The choreography is the same, the notes are the same, but the spirit is fading. The song that was once a vibrant, heartfelt plea for healing had become a part of the job. It was a mountain he had to climb every night, and each ascent took more out of him. In some of the last recordings, the song is almost a ghost of its former self. The orchestra plays with its usual professional polish, but Elvis sounds distant, disconnected. The final triumphant note feels less like a victory and more like a relief that it's finally over. The song had become a reflection of his own life. It started as a powerful, soaring statement of purpose, and it ended in exhaustion and pain. The glory was still there in the music, but the man singing it was running out of strength. Number 2, does the songs end offer hope or resignation? The structure of an American Trilogy is a journey. It starts with the lament of Dixie, rises to the triumphant declaration of the battle hymn, and then, instead of ending there, it moves to the quiet sorrow of all my trials. This final section is the key to the song's ultimate meaning, and it is deeply tragic. After the thunderous climax of glory, hallelujah, the music softens. The mood becomes intimate again. Elvis sings the words of the spiritual. The final lyrics he sings before the reprise of the battle hymn are often, "All my trials, Lord, soon be over." The song ends with a final, soaring, "His truth is marching on." But the emotional weight of the piece rests on that quiet moment of reflection. Is "soon be over" a phrase of hope, or is it a phrase of resignation? In the context of the spiritual's origin, it is both. It is the hope for freedom, for justice, for an end to suffering, but it is also an acceptance of mortality, a belief that even if this life is full of pain, peace will come in death. For Elvis in the 1970s, this duality must have been intensely personal. On one hand, the song is a message of national hope. It suggests that America's trials can be overcome, that truth will march on. But for the man singing it, a man in deep personal turmoil, the line "soon be over" likely felt much more immediate. It was a wish for his own pain to end. The most heartbreaking part of the song is the verse from "All My Trials" that says, "Hush little baby, don't you cry. You know your daddy's bound to die." Elvis, a devoted father, sang these words. It is a moment of devastating vulnerability. It is an acknowledgement of mortality, of the inevitability of loss. It is the opposite of the confident, immortal image he projected in his jumpsuit. It is a moment of pure human truth. So the song does not offer a simple, happy ending. It does not pretend that the conflicts are easily resolved. After all the noise and glory of the anthems, it leaves us with a quiet, sad truth: life is hard, and it ends. The hope it offers is not for a perfect world, but for peace at the end of a long struggle. The final glory feels earned, but also somber. It is a glory that understands the full cost of the trials that came before it. For Elvis, a man marching toward his own early end, that was the only kind of glory that made sense. Number 1, what did Elvis leave unsaid when the music faded? When the final note of An American Trilogy faded and the audience erupted in applause, Elvis would stand, breathing heavily, soaking in the adoration. He would bow, accept the cheers, and then move on to the next song. He never explained what the song meant to him. He never sat down and detailed his reasons for singing it. He left the performance to speak for itself. The ultimate tragedy is in that silence, because in that silence, we are left to piece together the story. The song was his autobiography set to music. It was the story of a poor Southern boy who absorbed the conflicted culture of his home and became the most famous man in the world. It was the story of a man of deep faith who lived in a world of worldly temptation. It was the story of a patriot who loved his country but saw its painful divisions. It was the story of a father and a husband whose family was breaking apart. It was the story of a vibrant, powerful performer who was slowly being consumed by his own fame. And American Trilogy was the most ambitious, the most complex, and the most revealing song he ever performed. It was the one place in his tightly controlled career where all the contradictions of his life and his country were allowed to exist at the same time. The pain, the glory, the hope, The sorrow, the sacred, the profane, it was all there in those few minutes of music. He didn't need to explain it because he was living it. The performance wasn't just about the Civil War or the 1970s. It was about his own internal civil war, the battle between the shy, polite boy from Tupelo and the rhinestone-clad king of Las Vegas. The struggle between his spiritual yearnings and his earthly appetites. The conflict between his desire for a normal life and the impossible demands of his celebrity. He left it all on the stage, in the music. When the song was over, what was left unsaid was everything. His pain, his fears, his loneliness, his hopes for his daughter, his sorrow over his failed marriage, his quiet prayers in the middle of the night. He wrapped all of it up in the flag, in the cross, and in the history of his nation. He presented it to us as a grand spectacle. It was a magnificent act of concealment and confession all at once. The story of An American Trilogy is not just the story of 3 songs. It is the story of a man who used the music of a nation to tell the heartbreaking story of his own soul without ever having to speak a word of it aloud.